Hey, my name is Ditech, and I like to modify computers, and I thought it would be a pretty cool idea to take apart and modify a solid-state drive. Now, this is more of like a proof of concept video rather than just a straight up tutorial because while I am going to show you how I modified the solid-state drive that I have, you can do a whole bunch of other stuff too. This is like only limited to your imagination. So hopefully after watching this and kind of seeing the few different methods that I use to modify the one that I have, you would kind of know what you might want to do to your own. And as always, there is some useful information in the description of this video that kind of goes along with the video, so check that out as well. So I have two different brand new solid state drives here. The one on the left is just the cheapest one I could find on the internet. It's just meant to be generic and boring, and that's the one that I wanted to try and modify to make look awesome. And the one on the right is the already awesome TForce Delta RGB SSD, and I just wanted to take that one apart to see how it works and to see if I could use some of the same methods that it uses to make my cheap generic one look just as cool. Now the TForce SSD is pretty much the same as the generic one except for the fact that it has one extra wire that plugs into an RGB header on your motherboard. Plugging that in powers an LED strip that sits inside of the housing of this SSD, and that kind of disperses light directly into a piece of acrylic that sits behind the window with the TForce logo on it. The LED strip is strategically hidden behind the Delta branding underneath the window, so you can't really see the diodes directly. All you can see is the ambient light that comes out of them, which is something that we probably want to take note of because if we're going to be copying this method to use on our generic SSD, then we also want to hide our LED strips just because if you can see the diodes directly, it just makes a really bright spot in one area and it's darker in all the other areas. It just kind of looks weird. The TForce SSD is super easy to take apart. All you do is unscrew the 3 screws holding it together and pull the 2 sides apart. And once you do, you'll see that there's not a whole lot to it. It's just a PCB on one side and an LED strip and an acrylic piece taking up all of the rest of the space. If you unscrew the LED strip, you can see that it's side emitting, which is really nice. You actually can't really find that too easily online, and it is the best way to backlight acrylic. If we wanted to replicate this method, we would probably be using a regular front-facing LED strip because they are pretty readily available online and they're cheap, but if you can manage to find a side-emitting LED strip, then great, you should definitely be using that. It's definitely still possible to get the front-facing LED strip to work correctly and look good, it just won't be as bright. So after figuring out how my cool TForce SSD worked, I started pulling apart my generic plastic one, which I did just by unclipping the little tabs that hold it together on the sides. I used a small plastic screwdriver to pull them apart, but if you have an actual pry tool from like an electronics repair kit or something, that would be easier. Either way, it just takes some precision and time to get these tabs apart without breaking them, so just be gentle and take your time. And once it is apart, you'll see it's a super simple thing. It's just a small PCB inside a much larger plastic housing. The plastic is just there to give it some protection from scratches and bumps and drops and stuff like that, and to give your screws something to hold on to when you're trying to mount this SSD inside of your case somewhere. And don't worry too much about hurting your solid state drive by taking it apart. It is true that if you take apart a regular hard drive, you're pretty much guaranteed to break it. It's not a good idea to do that. But taking apart a solid-state drive is completely fine as long as you're gentle and don't smash it accidentally. In fact, you could even just keep it outside of its plastic case and just like use some double-sided tape to tape it to the side of your case, and it would live just as long and happy of a life as it would have anyway. If you like to look at just bare PCBs, then go ahead and do that, but I prefer to keep the case because it makes it easier to attach to like hard drive cages and stuff, so I'm going to modify that further.
Wherever you residing, better lift your head. I know you've been hiding. If you have a sign, you better start raving. I've got a lonely soul you could be saving. We're trying recipes. I'm having trouble finding.
I cut a window into the area of the plastic where the SSD would be visible through it, but there's no space to put a piece of acrylic between that window and the PCB, so it's just going to be exposed, which, like I said, is completely fine. It won't affect anything negatively. I did want to try the LED strip mod though, so I also cut a little design into the other half of the SSD without anything in it so that I could fit some acrylic in there. You can do this with kind of whatever tool you want, like a Dremel or a scroll saw like I used, or some kind of precision handheld saw, or whatever works. Just cut out whatever design you think looks good and then mount a piece of acrylic behind it with some super glue or hot glue or something. You would cut the acrylic to size with the same tool that you use to cut out your design, so your Dremel or your scroll saw or whatever else you have, and then you just have to make sure there's still enough room inside of the plastic housing for your LED strip to fit in there as well. Once it's secured into place successfully, just also secure your LED strip in there using hot glue or whatever other kind of adhesive you might have. And then it's usually a pretty good idea to stick some kind of white sticker behind the LED strip and the acrylic panel. You'll notice that the professionally made RGB SSD also has a white sticker behind its acrylic, and that just helps to disperse the light evenly. It kind of just helps the light bounce off of it and back through whatever window or design you cut into the front of the plastic part. And actually, paint would be better to use than a sticker or a vinyl sheet or anything, because paint doesn't have any air bubbles, and if you use vinyl or a sticker of some kind, you might get some air stuck behind it, and you'll be able to see that when there's a light shining through it. Then all that's left to do is replace the actual SSD back into the plastic case and put it back together. And that's super easy to do. You just push the two sides back together, and those plastic clips that we unclipped earlier will just clip again. And it doesn't even matter if any of them are broken. Like, if you broke one or two of them while you were taking the case apart, then the rest of them will hold the thing together just fine anyway. Then you just plug the LED wire into your RGB header on your motherboard or into some adapters that connect to your power supply, and that's pretty much it. You can check the description for all of the materials that I used, like the LED strip that I used and the adapters that I used to plug it into the power supply, and just some general other useful information as well.
Wide open, wide, wide open, wide open, wide, wide open. Why don't you bring me someone? Bring me someone new. Bring me someone new. Wide open, wide, wide open, wide open, wide, wide open. Why don't you bring me someone new? Bring me someone new. Bring me someone new.
So hopefully now you kind of know whether or not you would want to modify your solid state drive, and even if you don't want to modify it, maybe you learned what's inside of a solid state drive. It's pretty cool. There's not much in there. And like I said, check the description for a list of all of the materials that I used in this video, as well as all of my social media accounts like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Patreon, Discord, my website, that kind of stuff. I got a lot of stuff. Also, if you want to see more PC modding related content in the future, go ahead and subscribe to this channel, and I will see you in the next one.